Hi, and welcome to this video about Utah hiking. These are the views that we first saw as we walked across the ridge into Bryce Canyon to see the views of the rock formations they call the hoodoos, which are featured here better than anywhere else in the world, probably. You can see how unusual the rock is, and all caused by erosion over the years, wind, snow, ice, rain, all weakening some areas and letting out areas hold. And you can see how spread out and amazingly diverse the rocks are. And we had a great time walking around here. The trails are great. They fit into the landscape very well. We walked along a ridge and then down into the canyon eventually, and all around the rock formations down there. Sometimes you'll see the trails blending in. This is still from the ridge before we headed down. It was a little wet in the morning and somewhat cloudy off and on during the day and a little chilly, but still obviously beautiful. There you can see Joe in the perspective of the rocks. Joe Morehouse was along on the trip. He walked in front of me because he was a fast hiker, but also because I took a lot of pictures and I farted a lot. So you see all the caves and different kind of rock formations, the towers, the undulations, the trees. Very hardy trees. We had lots of little trees and interesting places that you may or may not see as the pictures go so fast. That one looked like a mushroom or troll house. Nice window through the rocks, and then more expanses of the hoodoos and the rock formations. I took about 250 pictures just this one day, so I had to select a lot of them out. Every one of them is beautiful, but we had to just include the smaller number. There's a big panorama after we got a little bit higher up again. And then we also went and saw London Bridge, which is a special rock formation, before heading back up to the top of the rim in the car for lunch. Then we went by Queen's Garden, which is a beautiful collection of rock formations near the lodge that's more accessible for the average tourist. And we followed that down back into the canyon. This place had great views through the rocks down of the canyon floor and the trails, as well as lots of little tunnels through the rock and caves. It was the place that you don't want to miss if you go to Bryce Canyon. We took a side trail then that also wound through, again, more and more beautiful rock formations and took us more south to the area near Bryce Point, which required a fairly good climb back up, but lots and lots of good views. And now the sun is out and brilliant in the afternoon. It was such a nice day, even though it was a little bit cold. That's a nice tunnel. You can see Joe in the background there, and that's looking back out from that tunnel. And then we got up to Bryce Point, which is 8,300 feet, which was close to the highest we got that day. And from there, the views are great. And you can see the rows of the hoodoos as you look out. The sun was now perfect, and we walked back along the ridge, which was a nice hike. The white rocks stand in stark contrast to the brown and reds.
This is Bryce
and
Point, walking back on the rim trail.
There's Bryce Point in the background.
Bryce Point over there.
Now, after that, we went to all of the different viewpoints along the way and got lots of good shots still of the valley floor and canyon
Inspiration
floor.
point.
The vast number of these rock formations is just incredible.
Around 5 o'clock.
There's a little rain that came in and showed some rainbows. The next day we drove up to Capitol Reef. These are a couple little spots on the way in. We got fruit pies there at the Gifford House, and then we went on our hike. It climbed up quickly and then went into a really nice canyon. You can see Joe there before we entered it. The canyon was initially lots of boulders, but then got nice and flat with a little sand trail through it and some slot canyons off the side that Joe was very good at finding. We love the slot canyons. So really neat rock formations all around. The scalloping of the walls, the layers, and then we got out into the open on the other side of the canyon and missed a turn, climbed up this area, which was still very nice, to scenic area, and then we went back and got lunch, ate our pies, and went to the Hickman's Bridge, which is a nice stone bridge, natural arch, in another part of Capitol Reef. And from there, we walked back and caught a trail up the rocks, a long climb up for some scenic views of Capitol Reef and some very good exercise. Not quite as high in altitude as Bryce Canyon, so it was a little bit easier getting around.
Beautiful view.
There's a escarpment that runs for about 100 miles through that part of Utah from north to south, and Capitol Reef is just on the edge of that. It's very interesting to see. I would have been amazed to see it from a covered wagon heading west and suddenly coming to the edge of that and thinking how you're going to get down. There's some really neat formations and views from there, those gray rocks and the snow-covered peaks in the background. The next morning we started out at Kodachrome State Park, which was a beautiful state park. Again, lots of interesting rock formations, and that's the ballerina rock. This is the hat shop, and then these areas are just undulating rock, interesting chunks taken out. The moon was just slightly visible. We headed down the trail to the Cool Cave, which had, again, lots of interesting rock formations, and followed some narrow passages. I thought that looked like an Easter Island figure. And finally you get behind the rock walls and you're going to the cave, which was actually pretty cool, in all the senses of cool. You can see how big the opening is, and then you can see the sky out through it. From there we went to a place called Panorama Point, which had a pretty steep climb up and some nice views
Route 12.
of Kodachrome and the surrounding area. Sometimes you could see places like Bryce Canyon
I'll say.
in the distance. This is called Grosvenor Arch, which was one of the top-rated tourist destinations. That's on a road that then connects down through the grand staircase of the Escalante. That park was pretty neat, had lots of good slot canyons, and we found a bunch of them here on this trail that the ranger pointed out when we went to the local land management shop. This first canyon ended up in sort of a dead end, and then we went back and went on another one, but both of them were really cool with lots of undulating rock, lots of caves, lots of openings, little slots, not much water, thank heaven. And we were getting to a point where we had to crap or get off the pot with this trail, and we made the decision to keep going, and we found that it connected back to the road and we were able to get back to the car quicker. The next day we were staying in Kanab and drove just north of Kanab. There's a place called the Sand Caves where they mined sand. And you had to climb up that little cliff to get to the caves, which weren't all that great, but that was still an interesting adventure. And then we drove east from Kanab and did this hike, which is famous for its slot canyons. These were great. This one had a little ladder on it, as you'll see.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Joe. Excellent news. And there's looking back at the ladder. This is probably my favorite thing that we found, was these little slot canyons. I love the views at Bryce Canyon, but hiking through the slot canyons was really neat. This one was really undulating and wild. This is at the end of the final slot canyon. We could have gone further, but we just went back. We had enough time to drive down to the north rim of the Grand Canyon and got there late in the afternoon when the sun was nice. You don't have as many options for viewpoints there as you do on the south rim, but it's still pretty and it's not crowded at all. There are only a few people around. The next day was our first day at Zion. We stayed in Kanab that night and drove up from there, which is just a short drive and a really cool drive into the park, which I didn't take any pictures because I was driving. Our first hike was the trail that's very common for the tourists to go on along the river up to where the Narrows starts. I've already seen those pictures. Now we're walking back along the stream that made the canyon. Then we started up the trail to Angel's Landing, which is right there. We had to go up Walter's Wiggles to get to that point, and there was a lot of views of Angel's Landing from there. And then we pressed on rather than go up Angel's Landing because we didn't have a permit, to some observation points, which are really pretty. This is a pretty good hike. A lot of varied terrain, lots of cliffside views, lots of hiking on the edge of rock, and interesting rock formations. And there was a little spring at the top, which is kind of a disappointment. But still, even Zion, you can see some fall foliage there. They had more trees than most of the other places, a lot of oaks and small maples. And that's one of the classic trails, just with a cliff on the side. We ended up getting all the way up to those flat areas and then had great views looking down into the valley. Now we're heading back, and we're getting close to Angel's Landing again and trying to get pictures of Walter's Wiggles from the mountainside. This is now at Walter's Wiggles after we've gone past Angel's Landing, and you can see how the switchbacks work going up. Very beautiful back in this narrow canyon as well, along the switchbacks in the trail. And there's a view looking back south towards the visitor center from there. And then we went back to the visitor center by the shuttle and did a quick hike there at the end of the day. It was about 3.5 miles long. This is then, I think the next day, we went up to Kanab Canyon, which is in the northwest corner of Zion and enters by a different entrance. And we started out early, and the sun doesn't get in there very well because of the steep sides of the canyon. So you can see how the sun shines on just the one side from the east. It was a really nice hike, not as steep or hilly. We found this little arch and then headed back. We forgot how steep the end was, and it was quite a long journey up, about 700 feet in the last mile to get back to the car.